Good morning, everyone. I just am feeling a moment, particularly a moment of such gratitude for Swami Kriyananda. Just before we walked out, the ministers walked out here, Ramurti said to me, "Were you expecting to hear the affirmation on introspection today?" And I said, I never look at the affirmation before my talk. Probably be embarrassed to say that, but that's the truth. So I said, if I ever comment on it, it's just spontaneous because I'm not ready for it. And I don't always, because I don't read it, I don't always see the connection with the affirmation in the reading. But this was so beautiful today. I want to reread some of this because here we've just had this reading which is sobering at best. I mean, in one of his expanded comments on this reading, Swami Kriyananda uses the word terrifying. He literally says, we should be terrified because here, as he said today, is Judas, who became one of the 12 disciples. He had to have been an extremely highly evolved, spiritually highly evolved being. And yet we just watch him get pulled into this delusion, and we think about ourselves, even though, I've said many times up here, if we're in this church today, if we're certainly on this path, but even anyone who was drawn here, even some of you who might be here for the first time, it says in the Bhagavad Gita that out of 1,000, one will search for God. And if we're in this temple, we've got to be one of those 1,000. And we have to hold that. We have to say, what does that mean for this life? Those of us who have taken discipleship and chosen this path, we've committed ourselves to being disciples of an avatar, of a fully realized being, and students for most of our life, and maybe many of us would use the word disciples, to a direct disciple of Yogananda, Swami Kriyananda. So as I once heard somebody say, and it's right, we're second generation here. We ourselves have to think, who are we? What are we doing in this life? How can we make our strongest commitment ever to these teachings, to realizing this divine truth, to not wasting this incarnation? Many years ago, I used to tell myself that. Be careful, Shanti, make sure you're paying attention. This is an important incarnation. Now I'm about to be 71, and I tell myself, you have a few years here. You really have to pay close attention. These years that I have left, moments maybe, but years, they're going to go by in a moment. And every day I tell myself, what will you do today to keep yourself on track, to keep yourself remembering the true purpose of your life? So just to come back here for a moment, Judas, really we can see how easy it is. It was very easy for Judas to start thinking to himself, whatever went on in his head, that he decided that he knew more than Jesus. Both of these J words are a little hard. I hope I said Judas before. But here Judas somehow managed to convince himself that he knew better than Jesus, that he was going to be able to say to Jesus, what's wrong with you? You should have taken this ointment, sold it, and then given that money to the poor. As if he had this sort of nerve, we would say, to imagine that Jesus wasn't moving with total clarity and consciousness, that there was no reason why he was allowing Mary to be rubbing this ointment. We're all living so close to that delusion, Swamiji says in here, in the reading today, but it goes by quickly, that we might call that Satan. In fact, we've read many times, we hear it in many of our studies, that Satan, which is really part of the infinite consciousness, but that part of the consciousness that identifies with, that tugs on, that helps us emphasize our lower nature, our more egoic nature, that which wants to thrive on the material plane, whatever words we give to it. Satan is that force in the world that gets a hold of that and develops its own magnetism around it. So before we know it, we're being drawn around by a force that we have been completely unconscious of. So Swamiji, in his infinite wisdom, has us read about introspection today. Introspection is one of the niyamas with the great sage, Saint Patanjali, who wrote for us all of what every soul will have to go through, regardless of religion, if he is to attain spiritual freedom. And self-study or introspection is one of them. So this is a very high spiritual quality necessary for all of us. But Swamiji says, introspection means to behold oneself from a center of inner calmness without the slightest mental bias, open to what may be wrong in oneself, not excusing it, but not condemning it either. Introspection means referring what one sees to the superconscious mind and detachedly accepting guidance when it comes. And I'm sitting here and I'm saying to myself, if only Judas had done that. If only he had been a little more introspective. If only he had done. I felt like Swamiji was saying to us in this affirmation today, don't do what Jesus did. Pay attention to this quality, to the depth of it, to the meaning of it. Read the niyamas again, introspection. Offer whatever it is you think to be the truth up to your superconscious mind, to that soul knowing. It is so easy to fall. You know, last night when I was thinking about this talk, Lucifer came to mind. I was born and raised Jewish, and I don't know that much about Lucifer. So I looked it up. I looked up what is the meaning of that word, Lucifer, because Lucifer was one of the highest angels, and now his name is synonymous with the devil. How did that happen? It's actually just another story. And Lucifer means the bearer of light. Isn't that something? That's who that soul was. And then he just like Judas, we just see how easy it is. These are the highest souls, and they suddenly get this little idea over here that they know the way to be. They get drawn away from that light of superconsciousness that they've been already living in, and they fall. You know, to me, it says we have to be prepared for war. I thought to myself, no wonder the Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield. Krishna is saying to us, get ready to fight. We have to do that. And, you know, I remember Anandi in some talk at some point said, she was talking about this battle that we all have to get ready to do. It's not as horrible as it sounds. The battle just keeps bringing us back to the divine. The battle is exactly how we're given every opportunity to grow spiritually. So it's not like a horrible war, as we learn through the Gita. There are these righteous wars where the very fighting of them is what takes us to God. And as we go through these battles and we feel so much closer to our divine self, so much more in tune with it, joy comes. So I want to put that word out there. Peace comes, calmness, right in the middle of this battle. The battle is a great opportunity. But Ananda created this image. It just came to her. She was talking once. She said, how many times in how many movies do we see that there's a hero and there's a villain? And they fight, and it looks awful. And then the hero wins. He slays the villain, and the villain's down on the ground. And in the movie or whatever we're watching, he goes walking away, and just then the villain wakes up and gets one last bit of energy, and it comes running after the hero and goes at him with everything he has. That's really what we need to be ready for. That's the war. We have to be ready because it's where we are. That's where we are. We're not new on this path. We've been around a lot of lifetimes. These will not be easy battles. You know, Swami Kriyananda says over and over that although we always say as human beings, we've been given free will, and we have, and that's what differentiates us from all of the ways that this consciousness, this individual consciousness of each of us has existed before. That really we don't have as much free will as we'd like to think we have. And he says, you know, we might learn a lesson or two in life. It's not huge. We don't have the free will to just suddenly know everything. But we always have the free will to make the decision to look towards God or away from God. If Judas had stopped and done a little bit of introspective work, he might have said, what am I thinking? We can always stop. We can always do that. But it's not easy. It never gets to be easy. There's, in Italy, there's, I can't think of the name of the place right now, but somebody will remember in a minute and you'll yell it out. But there's a place in Italy that we often go to on pilgrimage where there's a large collection of sculptures that were done by the artist Della Robbia. And one of them, which is utterly exquisite, is of the Annunciation. La Verna, thank you. I knew somebody would get it at some point. A wonderful place to visit if you can. It's where St. Francis received the stigmata. A very, very holy, the holiest of places. And there are all of these sculptures there. And these pieces of his work. He was originally from Florence, and he devised a new technique. And so he became very famous for his work, but he also became famous because each piece is alive and exquisite, and it's there for us to have an experience of the divine, of some quality that, or some challenge, some aspect of this life on our way to God. And in the Annunciation, and I'm very grateful to Jyotishan Devi because when I first went to La Verna, it was with them. And they said that the first time they went, there was a very old Franciscan priest. And he said to them, let me show you this piece of work. He said, look how magnificently the artist captured this moment for Mary when the angel comes and says, will you take on this karma of being the mother of God? Now, we might think that was an easy, like, no-brainer. Are you kidding? I'd love to be the mother of God. Many of us who are mothers might feel that way. But he captured her right in that moment of question for her, right? A moment of decision where she had to stop and be with the enormity of what was being asked of her. And I have now meditated in front of this piece for hours because it's so exquisite. And it says to us, we always have that choice. We always stop. Mary stopped. And you can see in those eyes, in her whole being, it's alive. Which way am I going to go? So we do have free will, but it's subtle and it requires determination. And Satan is always out here. I was thinking of a story last night, not a story, but an image of how we get pulled, what an amazing job happens in this energy that we call Satan, again, part of the infinite consciousness. What havoc he wreaks with the vrittis in our lower chakras. That's how it came to me. So I thought, here's how the story goes. We're sitting in a restaurant, we're having dinner, and music comes on. And you know how restaurants, they often do it. As it gets later in the evening, the music gets louder. And it's music that maybe we wouldn't put on in our home, but it's there. And we're just in our conversation, and we're not really paying attention to the music. But by the end of dinner, we look at our friend and we say, hey, would you like to go out for a drink? So the next thing you know, you're headed to the bar, and you're out for a couple drinks, and you might drink a little more than you wanted, and you start making decisions that you might not have made. And you behave in ways other than you might have behaved. Because now you've gone from a little music in the restaurant to the bar to alcohol to the place. Many of you have heard me say this before. I've seen hundreds of people in the course of my career, hundreds, who come into me and say, Dr. Rubenstone, I don't know what happened. I just found myself in bed with this person. And you think, what do you mean you just found yourself there? Because Satan was doing his job and doing it well, and just attaching himself to our lower chakras, and it's happening in such a powerful way there, but it's very subtle to the conscious mind. It's very subtle. We're not awake to it. If we're not consciously saying, stay awake, hold it, hold decisions, hold your thoughts up to that light of superconsciousness. How do we do this? This is all about attunement. There's no other way. We cannot fight delusion without the help of a God-realized person. It's virtually impossible because what Satan's out there doing is just too subtle for our conscious minds. You know, Narayani and Shurjo are here visiting us. They're sort of world travelers at this point. Narayani spent the last several years of Swami Kriyananda's life with him as his personal assistant, as his caregiver. She was literally by his side every moment. And in the last couple of years, Shurjo joined them, and the three of them were inseparable. And it's very clear that Swamiji was just pouring energy into both of them, really in the most beautiful ways. Clearly, they're great souls, highly evolved souls, or like Judas, they couldn't have been there to begin with, or like the 12 disciples. But Swamiji was really working with them, and they were awake to it. And the other night, we had a satsang with them, and they each told a story that I would like to share with you because it's just such a perfect example. And by the way, they told these stories for all the world to hear, and at least Narayani's is in her book, My Heart Remembers Swami Kriyananda, which I highly recommend reading. But Shurjo told a beautiful story about Swamiji saying to him one day, "Shurjo, I notice you don't wear a watch." And Shurjo said, "Yeah, I never wear a watch." Swamiji says, "I'd like to give you a watch." He goes to the drawer, he pulls out a very old watch, hasn't worn the watch in years, and the batteries are dead. So Swamiji says, "Let's go into town and let's get batteries and let's get the watch working again." And they do. And then the next day, he says to Shurjo, "Shurjo, what time do you have?" So Shurjo looks at his watch and he says, "I have 4:15, Swamiji." Forgive me if I don't have the exact times. Swamiji says, "That's interesting. Do they change each time?"
Every time I tell the story, I just make up a time.
There you go. Perfect. Because it's really not the point. But Shurjo looks, he says, "I have 4:15. Swamiji says, "That's funny. I have 4:17. Change your watch." So Shurjo changes his watch. The next day, Swamiji says to him, "Shurjo, what time do you have?" He looks. He says, "I have 3:16, Swamiji." Swamiji says, "This is odd. I have 3:17. Change your watch." So Shurjo changes his watch. And the next day, Swamiji asks again. So Shurjo says, "I have 8:20, sir." Swamiji says, "And how many seconds?" And Shurjo says, 47, 48, 49. I can't remember if Swamiji corrected him, but the point of the story is he did. Of course he did. That was the love that Swamiji had for Shurjo. That was the love that he had for this soul. Saying to him, with that simple little story, who would have known? Swamiji knew. Perfect attunement is the only way out of delusion. And if we lose it for even a moment, this is what happens. You're the light of all beings, or you're one of the 12 disciples, and the next thing you know, how about that word opprobrium in the reading? Anybody else have to look it up? Public disgrace for all Christendom. Those are powerful words. We don't have to be afraid of it, but we need to make sure that we have exactly the correct time. We have to do that. And we need to do it with our teacher because our consciousness is not clear enough. And what Satan is doing is so subtle that we don't know what's happening. The story, Narayani told many stories, but one of the stories that she told that is so touching to me, and I had read it several times in her book. Swami Kriyananda said, for those of you who don't know Narayani, she was born and raised in Spain. And in the early days of her time with Swami Kriyananda, language was a little bit of an issue for her. In fact, I think when she first met him, she had very, very, very few, if any, English words. He always told her, don't worry about the language. You'll get it by the vibration. He told her that right from day one. And of course, that turned out to be true. And that's another lesson for all of us. But in this story, Swami Kriyananda, she's trimming his beard one day, and he says to her, are you going to write a book about me? And she says, Swamiji, you might have noticed that my English isn't really all that great. And she said, I don't think I'm the one to write the book. And as if she hadn't said a word, he said to her, what kind of a book do you think it'll be? Do you think it'll be a biography or? How did Narayani respond to that? Any one of us, and it would have been totally understandable, had we said, Swamiji, I don't think I can do this. You can imagine that. It would just be so easy. Just like if we're honest, we could imagine sitting there with Judas and thinking, what's wrong with him? Doesn't he understand that the whole world is judging everything he does? Why would he be doing this? Why would he be so flagrantly behaving in such a materialistic way? Not hard to imagine these things. Narayani said to herself in 2 sentences, I I have to listen. He's responding. He means what he's saying to me. I have to attune myself. I have to raise my consciousness right now in this moment to where his consciousness is. I can't stay down here thinking I'm getting it right. That's how we fall. No, she knew. By God's grace and her own wisdom, she knew, I need to be where his consciousness is. And that's where she went. And she started talking about the book. These are beautiful stories with so much for us to learn, so that we're not finding ourselves wondering what happened. You know, in these past couple of weeks, I'm going to say, I'm not making fun of these people. They came as teachers to me. Several people, 3 people to be exact, have come up to me. I make it my business to try and meet as many new people as I can, to reach out to them, to talk to them. 3 different people said to me, no, I used to come here. No, I used to meditate. Oh, no, I went. One of them said, I'm a Kriyaban. I didn't know them. One was 3 years ago. One was 5. One was 9. What happens? How do you get initiated into Kriya Yoga? How do you spend time with all of these beautiful souls, hearing these beautiful teachings, feeling this vibration, and then suddenly, 3 years later, 5 years later, it happens. We need to be very mindful, very aware. We need to be introspective. We need to be asking ourselves, what is the level of consciousness that I need to be attuning myself to now? We have to remember, here's the good news. There is no eternal hell waiting for us. Any fall in our spiritual consciousness can never be permanent. This is the good news. We'll always find our way out. We are not sinners. Yogananda has said that to us over and over. We are manifestations of pure divine energy. We just need to practice, to stay aware, to take these techniques that we talk about all the time, to read this affirmation on introspection over and over. And more than anything, we have to take whatever that lotion, cream, salve is, anything that we have that's equivalent to what Mary was using, and we need to, with all the devotion we can muster, massage the feet of the Lord. We need to, with great devotion, hold on to the feet of God and not let go. Bless you all.